Well, it's not fully turned on yet, so. Okay, I'm probably going to truncate this a little bit since you have something else more urgent to do with the hurricane coming.
Are you on?
Yeah, green light's on. But I don't want to skimp on anybody's questions either. This is a much larger group than I anticipated. I've done this about 10 times now. I do have some literature from AMSAT up here. Some of it is free, some of it does cost, so just ask me at the end. I will go over some of it during this. My QTH is Fairview, North Carolina, and there are about 6 Fairviews, and I tell people I live in the one with the zip code. Because all the other Fairviews don't have their own zip code. I live about halfway between Chimney Rock, Lake Lure, and Asheville, in that area. So, and the reason I drove this far is, number one, Jeff, KK4MOV, asked me to, and you know what an arm twister he is. And the second reason is, I have very intimate ties to Winston-Salem. My mother was born in Bethania, as was her mother, I estimate that conservatively between 1/4 and 1/3 of the people buried at Bethania Moravian Church. At Forsyth Memorial Park, I have 3 great-grandparents, 2 grandparents, an aunt, and several great-aunts and uncles. And I still have a great-uncle who lives in Pofftown and another one who lives in Bethania. So I'm up here once a year for a family reunion at Bethabara. So I have a very intimate ties to this town. My mother went to R.J. Reynolds High School, although she's lived in Asheville for 60 years. Did anybody do the homework that Jeff passed out last month? It was also on the FARC website about how to listen for satellites. Nobody did their homework. You're all going to bed without supper. What I wanted you to do, I passed out that document about a month before I do a meeting because I want people to get familiar with satellite terminology, how and where to listen for satellites, and that's specifically for the FM satellites, which is mainly what I'm going to cover tonight, and the ISS. So if you didn't do it, no big deal. It is on the FARC website if you want to review it.
And we are recording this, so that if you want to review it, just go to the recording.
Okay. AMSAT has a good problem. These are all the satellites from 2017 field day.
Yeah, I got to do this to you. Sorry.
Okay.
You got to go no farther than that. Put the block in. Otherwise, you won't be on camera.
Yes, Daddy.
We can corral the speakers here.
All right. Okay. I just wanted them to see it. But these are satellites that were used for contacts on field day 2017, and you can see the different modes they're in. So it's about a balance now equal of single sideband and CW satellites versus FM satellites. And I haven't updated this bottom part recently, but Fox 1B is now AO91. Fox 1 Cliff is supposed to be launched 3rd quarter of this year. Fox 1D is now AO92. And the asterisk beside it, do any of you have 1.2 gigahertz equipment? Transmit, receive. Okay. That bird actually has a receiver on 1.2 gigahertz. We haven't had one like that in a while. So you can transmit to that one on 1.2 gigahertz and receive on 2 meters. It also has a 435 megahertz receiver as well, but you can't use both at the same time. And Fox 1E is supposed to be by the end of the year, but probably next year is when it's going to go up. All right, definition of a satellite space station. FCC does not define a satellite, at least in Part 97, but space station is an amateur station located more than 50 kilometers, which is how many miles? Yep, 32, above the Earth's surface. Okay, types of orbits. I'm going to talk about the inclination of an orbit first, because that's something important. Inclination of an orbit is when the satellite is going northbound over the equator. What angle does it pass over the equator at? For instance, ISS is 51 degrees, 51.4 degrees, angle across the equator. So naturally, you're not going to hear it much above 51.4 degrees north latitude. AO92 actually has you call it a retrograde. It's a 98 degrees, so it's going this way instead of you going at 90 degrees, it's going back. So actually, if you look at it the right way, it looks like it's going backwards around the Earth. Circular is self-explanatory. Polar, Acre sun synchronous. Molnia is a very elliptical orbit. It might be 200 miles when it comes on the backside of the Earth, but 22,000 miles when it's way out here. Almost high Earth orbit, even farther than that. AO13 and AO40 were both Molnia orbits. Anybody know the difference between a geosynchronous and geostationary?
Geostationary stays in the same place as far as the same distance, 23,000 miles.
Yeah, stays in one place. It's like the direct TV satellites and communication satellites. They sit at once. As the Earth turns, they move as well. Geosynchronous is slightly different. It means it's going to cross the Earth. It's almost in the same orbit as geostationary, but it's going to make a big figure 8 period, what's called a lemma, elongated 8, over a period of 24 hours. It's going to cross the same point on the equator at the same point of Earth every 24 hours, but it's not going to be over that point constantly, whereas the geostationary would. Okay, come on. Really? All right. Distance of orbits. LEO, low Earth orbit, 99 to 1,200 miles. Middle Earth orbit, 1247 to 22,236 miles. And I cannot find a good number for HEO. It either means highly elliptical orbit or high Earth orbit. I've seen both acronyms. But most of them agree it's 31 to 37,000 miles. These are Keplerian elements for the ISS, also called Zarya. These tell computer programs where parameters about the satellite, where to find it and all that. It used to be with the tracking programs, you had to put these in manually. So if you got one digit off, you're not going to hear the satellite, much less talk to it. And the only numbers I really remember, you can go back and look up and see what they are. This is the eccentricity. The closer to 0, the more circular it is. And this is the inclination, 51.6 degrees for the ISS. And the rest, let's say, you can look up if you want. The mean anomaly and all that, and you don't really need to get into all that. So let's talk about tracking programs. Since nobody did the homework, I assume nobody went to the AMSAT.org website to see what it looked like, what the tracking program looked like on AMSAT.org. So let's do that. Go under Satellite Info, go under Past Predictions, okay, this is for the International Space Station. We are in Echo Mike 96. I'll talk about grid squares in a minute. So this is format only. There's no pretty graphics or anything with it. So the time is in UTC. So there's going to be a pass at 2:58 UTC, but it's only going to be 1 degree in elevation. So no point in even trying to listen for that one. But any satellite you put in will have it in tabular format like that. There are other programs as well that will show you the pictures. And I'll show you one of those. Okay, this is SAT PC32, available from AMSAT. I've got about 7 different ones going, satellites that it's tracking. You can see, this is the sun line here. All of these circles are called footprints. Anybody who is in that footprint can communicate with anybody else who's in that footprint, because you can both see the satellite. And this program will actually steer the antenna for you and adjust the radio for Doppler, because there's a lot of Doppler shift on 440. Okay, tracking. On Android, there's Heavens Above, AMSAT Droid, ISS Detector. Heavens Above I have on my smartphone. I also have AMSAT Droid and ISS Detector. On that tablet is running AMSAT Droid and ISS Detector. Heavens Above won't run on it for some reason. But for iPad, iPhone, you've got GoSat Watch, Satellite Explorer Pro. For links, you have Predict and gPredict. Rig antenna control, SAT PC32 is made specifically for satellites. As I said, it will control the antenna if you have an ASL rotor, and also will control frequency of your radio as well. Ham Radio Deluxe will do it, not as well because it's more of a package. Anybody have HRD in here? It does everything, logging and all that. It's sort of everything. So it doesn't do satellites quite as well, although they're working on fixing that. Anybody know what an Armstrong rotor is? I'm sure the old timers know what an Armstrong rotor is. I'll give you an example. When I was a novice back in 1977, yeah, I got my license when I was 3. So now I've been licensed 41 years this year. I built an antenna, rotatable dipole, for 15 meters out of some aluminum tent poles. The tent had rotted away, so I thought Dad was going to throw them out. I said, well, I'm going to make an antenna out of these. So being 15-year-old, I couldn't afford a rotor, so if I heard a station I wanted to work, I'd run outside and turn it by hand. That's an Armstrong rotor. If you find an Alliance U110, they're not made anymore, snatch it up, because with that particular rotor, you can actually, the mast will pass through it completely. It's not like a lot of the newer TV rotors where it only going so far. That one you can usually use for an elevation rotor because the mast will pass completely through it. Yeah. Azel rotor, Yaesu makes one. It's about 55. It's a G5500. It's about $650 for the Azel rotor. However, M Squared makes one as well, and I haven't dared look up the price of that one. There's a way of getting around that. You can do a fixed elevation. Fix your Yagi at 15 to 20 degrees elevation, and just track it by azimuth. That way. The reason being is the satellite's going to be farther away when it's on the horizon, so you need more gain then from the antenna. When the antenna's overhead, which seldom happens, it will get 70 degrees sometimes, but rare to get to 90, then you don't need as much gain because the antenna is stronger being closer to you. So that's the way of getting around paying for an Azel rotor. Okay, talk about the International Space Station briefly. Capillary changes, you got to update at least weekly. They're always, even though it's 248 miles up, they're constantly having to boost the orbit up because they're even, if that weight, there is still drag on it. In fact, when they launch supply ships up to it, they use the fuel supply from the supply ships to boost the orbit up, so they have to carry up fuel all the time. Voice downlink on 145.800. Uplink is on 144.490. They're not on much because of time restrictions, and they're on, I think, Moscow time. So if you're going to hear them, it's going to be probably mid-afternoon here, or early afternoon, if they get on before they go to bed. There's at least one ham on board all the time. They do make a lot of school contacts. You'll be able to hear that if it's ISS is going overhead at that time over this location, you'll be able to hear it. You won't be able to hear the school, though, because the schools can be anywhere else in the world. They do it by telebridge, which is basically a guy in Italy. Say the ISS is going over Italy, a guy in Italy uses his ham equipment to track it and listen for the voices, and he sends it over internet to the school where they're actually transmitting, where they're asking the questions. So there are a lot of school contacts away. APRS 145.825. You can digipeat. Any of you on APRS in here? Okay. You can actually digipeat through the ISS. That was down until about 2 weeks ago, and it came back up, and nobody seems to know why. But the equipment, there's no equipment going up because the equipment up there is 10 to 15 years old, later this fall. There's a crossband repeater. The packet BBS never used because if you connect to it by a packet, it's going to wait for your acknowledgement. It's going to be well over the horizon because so many other people are trying to use that BBS at the same time. So that's discouraged from using a packet BBS. Ditto for the crossband repeater. They deploy that when they do Russian supply ships sometimes, the crossband repeater, and no one's really sure why. They do 2 or 3 times a year do slow scan TV transmissions from the ISS, so which you can receive easily. And that's going to be on 145.825. 800, excuse me. I'll show you a picture of that. This is the kind of thing that they send by a slow scan TV. This was downloaded by PY4ZBZ. I think who does nothing but telemetry and pictures all day. This guy must be retired. He is so dedicated to it. He's posting stuff constantly. He has worked. There's actually a lunar orbiter that China launched about 2 months ago. It's transmitting JT4G, which is another digital mode. It's in orbit around the moon, and this guy listens to the telemetry from that. That's how hardcore he is. But this is the kind of pictures they send down with information from Slow Scan TV. They do this 2-3 times a year. And ARIS is the International Radio and the Amateur Radio and the International Space Station. It's part of the program to it's the one who does the school involvement, gets the school signed up to actually talk to the astronauts. So support ARIS if you can. Okay, FM birds. Satellites are also called birds. They're single channel. It's like a crossband repeater in the sky. The first few satellites they put up had a 2-meter uplink and 2-meter downlink in the early 60s. Can anybody see a problem with that? No, because this is on a different subband. The problem is you can't really put duplexers up there with it because they're so small. The duplexers are big compared to the satellite. So you got descents constantly on. If you're transmitting on 2 meters and trying to listen, people did make contacts that way. They discovered, let's just do it on 2 separate bands. So it's a crossband repeater basically in the sky. Requires a PL on the uplink. Why would you think you would need PL on the uplink? Any ideas? Yeah. Noise. In the Middle East and certain countries in Africa and South America, a lot of taxi cab drivers like to use 2 meters for their communications. So that's to keep the taxi drivers and commercial people out who are on that band in a country they shouldn't be on. And so that's why it requires PL on the uplink. Usual, it's very rapid fire. The usual exchange is call sign and grid square. Let me play you what a QSO sounds like on SO50, which is one of the FM birds. Well, the sound was working earlier. Well, Mr. Murphy is visiting because it was working earlier when I tested it out. What you would have heard was me about 5 years ago on SO50, and it's very rapid fire. It is FM quality, a little bit of white noise in the background while somebody's not transmitting, but you jump in whenever there's a lull in the conversation. So I very nervously gave my call sign out when the satellite was about 50 degrees, and a guy came back to me, KYSC in Cleveland, which is where I got this recording from. And I was so nervous that I gave my call sign and grid square and said, first contact on satellite. He's like, okay, I'll send you a QSL card, which he does, and he records a lot of conversations. I realized later that's not entirely true. My first satellite contact was actually 20 years before. Anybody remember the blizzard of '93? I had the terrible misfortune of being on Montserrat, VP2M, that week, operating satellite. So I missed the blizzard. Darn the luck. So my first satellite QSO was actually during the blizzard. Well, you guys are having the blizzard here, so sorry. So, but it had been 20 years, so it was technically my first contact on an FM satellite.
Montserrat, I think of that volcano.
I was there 2 years before it went up. Yeah. In fact, on the QSL card is a picture of the volcano behind us. Okay, everybody familiar with grid squares? Okay, since anybody participating in the grid square competition? What's going on with ARL right now? Nobody? Okay. One guy in Asheville's like 7th in the state, and he's desperately trying to get to #1 in the state, but I don't think he's going to get there. But in 1985, a group of hams in England got together and said, why don't we split up the world into grid squares? It's 2 degrees by 3 degrees. So we're actually in Echo. Any of you live in Lexington area? We're close? Okay. I live in Echo Mike 85, right here, western part of the state. Most people in the room are in Echo Mike 96, right here. But if you live close, there are 4 grid squares that intersect here in the triad area. So let me pull that up. Okay. This is Echo Mike 96. Okay. This is Echo Mike 95 down here. This is FM 06 here and FM 05 here. So depending where you live, you could be in any, close by, you could be any of those. And you can actually, if you're on the border, you can give out contacts for both grid squares. Just take a picture of your GPS screen and say, okay, this is proof that I was here if anyone questioned it. So, and Knoxville has the same situation. There are 4 grid squares just outside of Knoxville that intersect like this. So anybody live in High Point or Greensboro or Lexington? Okay, which? Greensboro? Okay. You're in FM 06 instead of Echo Mike 96. But that's the exchange you do on FM satellites. It's call sign and grid square, and that's it, pretty much. Okay, let's talk about the linear birds, that is single sideband CW. They are like HF bands. In other words, they have, for instance, 75 meters is 3.5 kilohertz to 4 megahertz. So, and you have subbands of CW in that, by gentleman's agreement and voice and all that. Same thing with this. You have, instead of one being one frequency like an FM repeater, you're going to have a whole range of frequencies like you do an HF band. From anywhere from 20 to 100 kilohertz wide, depending on the satellite. And it's going to repeat everything it hears. Don't do FM on a linear bird. You will not make friends. You need it to be full duplex because you're going to have Doppler on transmit and receive. You don't have as much Doppler on 2 meters on the FM birds because most of the receivers have automatic frequency control, and it's only 15 kilohertz wide. But you will need it because your signal is much narrower on. You will need full duplex on linear birds because your bandwidth is much narrower on a single sideband SCW. There's a lot more rag chewing because it's a little more difficult because of the equipment you need to do it and all that. I say that FM satellites are both difficult and hard at the same time, difficult and easy at the same time. They're easy in a sense is you probably have the equipment to do it, but it's difficult in terms of the number of people on there that you have to try to talk over because it is the capture effect like an FM repeater. I'm getting to that. Okay, who was born after October 1974 in here? After October 1974. Okay. That's when AO7 was launched. No, there's a couple other guys. That's when AO7 was launched. It was sailing along. Its mode. It was 2 meters up. It's actually got 2 modes on. I'll get to that in a minute. It was going along until 1981, and the batteries started failing. So it went silent. Well, around 2002, a ham in England started hearing a signal he couldn't identify. So he started copying the telemetry from it and the beacon and realized it was AO7 had come back to life. Here's what happened from one of the engineers, they think. AO7 had a good set of arrays and the first battery recharge regulator we ever flew. It's the first spacecraft we ever had that was capable of overcharging the battery. When the battery failed, the battery cells began to fail short. One cell after another failed, and the voltage measure on telemetry began to drop. So the cells were clearly failing short. Now, after all these years, what happens if any one of the cells loses the short and becomes open? Then the entire bus becomes unclamped from the ground, and the spacecraft loads begin to be powered, but this time only from the solar arrays. Now you have a daytime-only satellite. So every time it goes into darkness, it shuts off. So when it goes back into sunlight, it comes back on. So a bird we put up 44 years ago is still kicking. Have any of you ever operated Aurora? The reason I ask is it's a very watery signal on AO7 because it's not stable voltage-wise. It's sort of like operating through Aurora. It's sort of watery, wavy kind of thing. But it's still quite usable for sideband and CW. So, and this was built. Remember, this was built by amateurs, not by a professional, much like the Ark. Yeah. And Tom Clark, one of the past presidents of AMSAT, has a slightly different take. He has described AO7 as the only known case where 2 catastrophic satellite failures canceled each other out. Okay, since the audio is gone kaput on me, I'll tell you about the K8YSE. That was one that he was working UT1FG, Yuri. Yuri is an interesting guy. He's captain of a freighter and goes all around the world. And since he's captain, he gets to operate wherever he wants. So he's put a lot of rare grid squares, maritime mobile, on the air. So that was actually a conversation with him on a single sideband CW. And I regret the audio's not working, but like I said, it was when I was testing it. WB6NOA QSO. Anybody know Gordon West? I knew you guys, old-timers, have heard of him. He put out a book several years ago about VHF, UHF propagation. And this is one he recorded off of AO10. This one was actually in high Earth orbit. And the interesting part is the same thing I noticed in Montserrat with the same high Earth orbit, is that the delay is so long you hear your own voice coming back. It's an echo, pretty much. So you've got your headphones on, and you hear a voice. So naturally, thinking of HF, you quit talking because you think it's the other guy. Well, then you realize it's me with a quarter of a second delay. And it gets distracting until you get used to it. But that was what you heard on WB6NOA's QSO, if it had played. How do you launch it? They literally throw it out the airlock of the ISS sometimes. Throw it out the window. Anybody know what the spacesuits are made out of? Any idea? Spacesuits that they use for spacewalks. Any idea what they're made out of? Yep. They're made mostly of Orlon now, and they do have expiration dates on them. So when the Russians say, this is out of date, they literally throw it out the window and let it burn up in the atmosphere. So they offered one to hams several years ago, and it was going to be out of date soon. So the hams, what they do, they put a radio in it, transmit only, and they put the antenna on top of on the helmet. But the antenna got damaged or broken or something, so only a few hams actually heard it. Again, that's one that they literally threw out the window. To get into high Earth orbit costs about $10 million now. And I'll tell you why. In the early 60s, when rockets were first being tested, they were looking for ballast, for weight to go on the rocket to make it balance out properly. So naturally, AMSAT said, okay, we need to launch these, but we have no vehicle to do it. So AMSAT volunteered their satellites to go up on the test rockets. Well, now that rockets are so much better, the price has gone up of launching them. So we do have a satellite in Germany right now, mostly because of 9/11 and ITAR. That's a whole other mess. That is ready to go up in high Earth orbit, but just a matter of finding the money to pay for it. Those were mostly phase 3, phase 4, like AO13, AO40. This is not used so much anymore, but piggyback as ballast, as I just talked about, and Department of Defense. There is the NASA Alana program. NASA recognizes this as an educational opportunity, so they pair with AMSAT pairs with universities to get satellites up. For instance, Vanderbilt is doing a radiation experiment. Vanderbilt University, so they can build the physics department can build that part of it, and AMSAT builds the radio part. And the NASA will pay for the launch because they recognize they've got a group of future engineers involved in this. So NASA is paying for a lot of AMSAT does pay for some of its own launches. The satellites have to go through the same routine as any other commercial satellite. The heat test, vibration test, all of that. It's not going to go up until it passes. So, and that costs about $250,000 to do that as well, besides the launch cost. So university used multi-satellites. Cubesats. Any idea how big satellites? We have 4 active FM satellites up right now. Any idea how big the most recent 3 are? Okay. I will pass this around. 10 centimeters by 10 centimeters by 10 centimeters. This is the size of AO85, AO91, and AO92. SO50 is about 3 times this size. It was launched by Saudi Arabia. I just glued some solar panels on the side, and I was going to put 3 pounds of sand in here or something weighted, but the cardboard was not stiff enough to support it. It can weigh no more than 3 pounds. But this is the size of the satellites we have up now. Antenna coming out, receive antenna is going to come out one side, and the transmit antenna is going to come out the other. They're opposite. And I'll pass that around so you can see what size it is. But yeah, that's a CubeSat. They're putting, I don't remember what they're doing now. They're starting to use supercapacitors. Yeah, testing those. I'm not sure what it is right now. Here's the antenna coiled up around it. They used to use nichrome wire to hold the antennas down. They got one on each side. When they got to the orbit that it was supposed to be at when it was launched, they would send a command up to heat a resistor to melt the nichrome wire, and the antenna would go boing. Well, they've decided to do even better than that, go more even low tech. They use fishing line now. So when the resistor heats up the fishing line, the antenna springs out. So here's the camera. I believe the solar cells and batteries are down, or solar array is, interface for solar array is down here with the batteries. Here's an interface, a Cat5 interface and all that. So, and all that is fit inside that box. In contrast, this was actually AO13, what I made my first contact on. 309 pounds, including 110 pounds of fuel, 53 inches high by 78.75 width. I do have to say, once one of the CubeSats that I'm passing around is launched, there's no way to boost it up. It doesn't have any kind of propellant, no way to do that. It does have bar magnets in it in the X, Y, and Z planes to stabilize it. It's still going to spin and tumble a little bit. That eases over time. But these actually had boosters in them to boost them up. AO40 weighed 1,200 pounds. And it did a lot more modes. This had a 1.2 gigahertz uplink, a 2.4 gigahertz uplink and downlink, a 435 megahertz uplink, and a 2 meter downlink, I believe. Okay, typical radio setup for FM sats. The first letter is going to be the uplink. That is what's going up to the frequency you're going up to the satellite on. So by convention, it's going to be capitalized, and the downlink is going to be lowercase. So VU is going to be 2 meters up and 440 down. SO50 does that. You leave your transmitter on 145.850, and one of the sheets I've got up here will cover this. Basically, that sheet covers everything I'm talking about tonight, but in more encapsulated form. So you start the receiver at 436.810. You shift the receive only down 5 kilohertz every few minutes. You'll hear the satellite start fading. The audio will get fuzzy. So you shift it down. If you have 2.5 kilohertz on your rig, so much the better, but 5 kilohertz is usually fine. So the transmitter stays constant on that one, on the uplink to the satellite. But you got Doppler shift on 440. But the Doppler shift on 440 is 3 times greater than it is on 2 meters. So you have to adjust for Doppler on that one. So the UV, which is AO85, 91, and 92, is 435 up and 2 meters down. So you leave the receiver on 145.980 in this case. Start the transmitter at 435.160. Remember the PL for both of these. And shift the transmitter up only every few minutes. I don't like this as well because with this one I can tell when I'm in the satellite because the transmitter is on a constant frequency. I tend to operate SO50. It's a little more difficult on AO85, 91, and 92. It's like, am I in the right uplink frequency, which is changing because it's on 435. To me, it's a little more difficult to get used to know if you're actually getting in or not, because you need to be able to hear yourself through the satellite. And mode LV, which is 1.2 gigahertz up, and V 2 meters down on AO92 and Fox 1 Cliff, which will be launched hopefully soon. Yes? Well, it is true. The frequency the satellite receives will be, it's going to be constant at the satellite. What the satellite receives is constant.
Right, but you can't leave the receiver on 145.96, which implies the reception on the ground is going to be constant. And if does it know how much Doppler shift by up in
Well,
orbit?
the satellite cannot compensate for Doppler. We have to. You can vary the receive frequency on that one if you like. You can start at 145.97 if you want, then 975, 980. But they have found, because it's such a wide signal being FM, and the fact that most FM radios have an automatic frequency control, that it's not worth the trouble. But you can do it. I did it my first few contacts because I didn't know better. I was trying to adjust both 2 meter and 440 while making the contact. You want to pull your hair out trying to keep track of transmit and receive and talk at the same time. So they found it. You can, as you said, leave it your receiver or move your receiver if you like, but it's just one more thing you have to keep track of. But they found it's.
How is it adjusting? If it's transmitting at 145.96 setting, you might be receiving at 144.96. With rising, if it maintains its frequency, you're going to pick it up at say 146.96.
It's not that. It's not going to be that drastic. You've got 1 megahertz. You're going 1 megahertz each side, and it's not nearly that drastic.
Okay, well, 100 kilohertz.
Yeah, 100 kilohertz. That's what's recommended. Again, you can, because they found it works, and that's what I do, is leave it just fixed. Again, you can vary it if you want to, and if you have one like Sat PC32 or Ham Radio Deluxe and a bigger radio like a TS2000X, it will do it for you. You can tell to do it to track both uplink and downlink frequencies, but they found it's just easier to leave it fixed because you're not going to miss that much leaving it. Well, yeah, the receive is going to stay here, but the transmit is what you're going to vary. No. And again, it's a 15 kilohertz, well, sometimes 7.5 kilohertz, but most of the time they use wideband, 15 kilohertz. Okay, radios for FM satellites. This is what I use. This is a Kenwood D72A. I bought it because I use it for balloon chases as well, because it has APRS and GPS built into it. This is also a great satellite radio for FM birds because it's full duplex. You can get by with half duplex. With full duplex, you want to be able to hear yourself through the satellite, but that's not absolutely mandatory on FM. If you can hear yourself, you know you're getting in well enough to be heard. But you'll need headphones. If you do full duplex and you try to do it like this, you get a feedback loop, and that was something that's something you really notice on the linear birds is. If you're going to do single sideband on AO13 or AO40, which are now no longer functioning, you have to have headphones on because you're going to get a 45,000 mile feedback loop going through the satellite, and you will not be appreciated. So for CW, of course, you don't have to do that. But if you're going to do full duplex, you need headphones. Dual band, you must have 2 VFOs on display at each time. Dual band is slightly misleading. There are some radios that are dual band, but you have to do either 2 meters or 440. You can't do both at the same time. They're not 2 different VFOs like this one has. So you need to be able to see both the 2 meter and the 440 side. That's what I mean by dual band on this. I talked about the Kenwood D72A. The 74, which is the follow-up to it, is not full duplex. Again, not insurmountable. Some older HTs, where is he? Oh, ICOM W32A. And KF4ML had one. He told me a while ago he regretted selling it because that was one of the best radios. It was full duplex for satellites. You can, and if you don't want to buy a big radio, you can use like 2 Baofengs, one for transmit, one for receive. So that's much less expensive. But you have to use caution. In the book, Getting Started with Satellites, it talks about which of the Baofengs are good for uplinks and which are good for downlinks because some of the filtering is not that great, and you can actually desense yourself. If you're transmitting on 2 meters, your third harmonic is going to be on 440. So you're going to be defeating it on purpose. So some of the Baofengs are good for it and some are not. They're listed in that book. Some people are using like Baofeng for an uplink and SDR receiver for the downlink now. The little stock antenna that comes with it probably ain't going to work. If you get one of the longer ones like the Comet, was it SRH1277, something like that, that will work better. People are getting into AO91, AO92 on L-band with like 1 watt radio and one of those longer whips. They thought it was going to take like 1,000 watts EIRP, and it's nowhere near that. You can use a telescoping whip and do pretty well with ISS-APRS. Dual band vertical mobile, lots of contacts have been made with AO51. Anybody here know what an egg beater antenna looks like? Yeah, you know, I know you said you had it. They look like an egg beater turned upside down. They're slightly better than verticals for reception. Remember, vertical's not going to do real well overhead when satellite's overhead because the gain is to the sides. Egg beater is slightly better than that, but still recommended to use preamps if you're going to do an egg beater antenna. I was talking to a ham couple at the Atlanta Ham Fest about 3 years ago, and they do a lot of RVing. They couldn't put Yagis on top of their RV. They were using egg beaters instead. And I said, well, that's better. And they still couldn't get in to SO50. And they were asking me about it. Turns out one of their friends recommended they put a 150-watt amplifier on. And I'm like, no. Turns out they were not using the PL. Yeah. If you know the PL on 150 watts, it's not going to help you. But so another thing is, you probably noticed this antenna. This is called the arrow antenna because it is literally made with arrow shafts, metal arrow shafts. 3 elements on 2 meters and 7 on 440. There is one called an elk antenna. It's a log periodic. All the elements are in one plane. Makes it a little easier to carry and use. For this one, you got to do a little trick. When you hear the satellite here, remember the antennas are in the same plane on the satellite. If you hear it real well here, in order to transmit it to it as well, you got to turn it this way, so the vertical, so it lines up. Then you got to switch it back, so it's a little more difficult. Whereas, like I said, the elk antenna is just all in one plane. But great antenna. This really outdoes a telescoping whip, as you can imagine. And Arrow Company makes these. Like I said, they're aluminum shafts. There are lots on the AMSAT website if you want to build your own. There's lots of different designs, WA5VJB, and there's a VE2 who does antenna designs. Okay. Okay. This one has a diplexer built into the handle. Like you can run no more than 10 watts through it. You do have 2 separate connections if you want to do 2 separate radios. By itself, it'll handle 150 watts, which is still too much for the satellite. But once you just 10 watts through the diplexer, but you can easily disconnect these and put some adapters in and use it with 2 radios. But the way it is, you can use it with just one, like the D72. Yes?
Do any of the amateurs use spiral antennas?
The helix antennas? Yeah, since 1.2 gigahertz is getting popular again on the uplinks, people are starting to build those. Nothing currently that's circularly polarized. The AO13, AO51, AO40, they had circularly polarized. Yeah, it's dead. AO40 and AO13, yeah. Yeah, well, they're FO29 and AO7 are the 2 most popular linear satellites. And there's also EO73 out of England. But I don't think any of them use, as far as I know, none of them use helical antennas. And the same antennas used for single sideband CW can be used for FM, but generally the linear satellites are much bigger. This is one that AMSAT M2 makes for Oscar pack. It's called Oscar pack. It mounts at the end, so you can actually use a metal boom here instead of fiberglass. But it's got elements in each plane, 440 and 2 meters. That's a good intermediate antenna. That's big enough for using for the high Earth orbit stuff if we had one, but it's also compact enough to use for the FM satellites. What else can you do with FM satellites? Download pictures, upcoming Fox launches. That's what Virginia Tech is doing now. They have done paired with AMSAT as well, and they actually have a camera on their Cubesat that takes pictures of the Earth, and you can download those using telemetry program decoding packages. On AO85, there are experimental Wednesdays where you can actually send a single sideband signal up and receive sideband signal, slow scan TV signal from other people. And if you want to do telemetry, I won't read all of this, but one neat thing they're doing is they're doing data under voice. On AO91 and AO92, they have filtered the audio below 300 hertz. If you have really good hearing when you're listening to the audio on, if you hear a rumbling underneath it, that is actually data under voice that is being passed back to Earth at the same time, being decoded by Fox-to-Lim software. Okay, we'll talk about AMSAT in just a minute. AMSAT is entirely volunteer except for one person, the office manager up in DC area. She's the only paid employee. The rest of us are volunteers. And even the engineers and guys who design this do it of their own love of ham radio. We have to run. We have bills like going through the testing before something can go into orbit and all that, and for the parts and all that. But it's a labor of love, like much of everything else in ham radio. So again, one paid employee, so donations are welcome, kind of thing. Memberships are $44 a year. I've got a couple of things for sale up here if you want to talk to me about it afterwards. But I like this. I like the last line. Rarely have a group of amateur volunteers managed to do so much for so many with so little. Mission of AMSAT: foster amateur radio's participation in space research and communication. Dayton Amateur Radio Club is a big donor, big contributor. They give like $5,000 a year to AMSAT to help out. ARL is a big donor. And again, these are people doing it in their garages, building these Cubesats in their garages, kind of thing. Okay, so how do you actually make a satellite contact? Remember, you need your headphones. Make sure you got your radio on full duplex. Make sure you have some HTs will let you do a crossband memory. This one will not, unfortunately. So I usually use both VFOs. I wish there were more HTs that will let you do a crossband in a memory, make life a lot easier. You're probably wondering why the cones. Stagger this one a little bit. What you do is you go out ahead of time and say, okay, everything you'll get off the tracking is going to be true north. So you need to know what true north is. So you go outside before the pass, a few minutes before the pass, and say, okay, that tree over there is where it's going to be AOS, accurate acquisition of signal. That building is where it's going to be the highest elevation. And that stop sign is where it's going to be going out of sight. So what you do is, if you want to, label your cones. Put one at AOS, one at highest elevation, and one at LOS, just as a reference. So you listen for the satellite when you hear it. Don't transmit till you hear it. I'm going to start here, stay in one spot, start here, make a slow arc up to where the highest point is, and then back down. You're going to twist this at the same time. Remember, you got to adjust for best reception. Then you have to remember your call sign, your transmit. You have to remember the guy's call who you're talking to and his grid square, and hopefully you're not nervous at all. So you need about 3 more hands to do it. Now, what a lot of people do is just put a little voice recorder in their pocket to save you a step there. So you have to drop the antenna right down. And this does get heavy, as light as it is, after about 3 minutes. So I switch hands during the pass about 3 or 4 times.
How long is the pass?
The best pass could be 15 degrees if it were overhead. Best case scenario.
How long was it?
15 minutes. But that's rare. Most of the time, 7.5, 8 minutes. Just depends on how high it goes. But start here, twist it, slowly come this way. If you hear it, call. Remember to twist it again to transmit. Twist it back. So it's a lot to do, but so that's what the cones are for, just a visual reminder. And that's basically what you do to make a satellite contact. I'm not saying it's easy. Everybody left AO91. Everybody left SO50 when AO91 and AO92 got launched because they were the new kids on the block. So I thought, well, SO50 is going to be easier to get into now. Tuesday night, 2 weeks ago, 2 weeks from tomorrow, I was on SO50 about 8 p.m. local time. It was a zoo. I could never get in with this setup. Just so many people. I thought, what happened to everybody going to AO91 and 92? So it's, as I said, it's both easy and hard at the same time. Easy in terms of you may have the equipment to do it, but hard in terms of trying to get into the satellite sometimes. And any questions? That's all I've got for right now.
Yeah, so you're doing this with what?
5 watts. You don't need that much power with gain antenna. It's a capture. It's like anybody else who's on a local FM repeater. Whoever has the most power EIRP getting into the repeater is going to get in. If they're running 1.5 kW on FM, they're going to be heard. Nobody else will. So same thing here, capture effect. One guy in outside of Atlanta, he decided he wanted to see how many contacts. He worked 100 grid squares with 50 milliwatts.
Well, how well does that do shooting through trees and that sort of thing?
It's not so much on 2 meters, but when you start getting to 440, especially 1.2 gigahertz, 2.4 gigahertz, trees eat RF at 2.4.
Yes.
Yeah. One thing I want to talk about too is I call this the Bible. Getting started with amateur satellites. It's got everything for the beginner to the more expert. It tells it in here how to upgrade gradually. It has a great appendix in the back talking about the different satellites, when they were launched, their orbital mechanics, frequencies they're on, that kind of thing. I do have some of these for sale. This is my personal copy, but I'll pass it around so people can look through it. Okay. Anything else? Book is 25. I've got 4 copies in here and 2 more out in the truck. So I'm not here pushing AMSAT stuff. I happen to have this. No, I did an AMSAT booth at the Shelby Ham Fest with another guy. Did any of you see me there? I know Harold was there, N4HER. I don't know if he saw me or not. So this is what I have left over from Shelby that I've got to send back. So I just happen to have this stuff with me. Frequency charts, I've got some of those. They are $5. It's basically the appendices, but on page and a half. And the rest of the stuff is free. Like I said, there's a sheet. I didn't anticipate this credit. I only printed out about 25 of them. So just take my business card, email me if you want a copy of that. It's also available on the website. But it's basically everything I covered tonight on the over-the-FM satellites. So I've got 25 of these. If you don't get one tonight, just drop me an email. I can email it to you. The AMSAT Symposium is going to be in Huntsville in first weekend in November. They have a different location. Last year was in Reno. Year before it was on a cruise ship in the Gulf of Mexico. Year before that was in Chicago. They like to move it around, but it's the latest and greatest and all the big wigs, and you find out all these new things that are going on. So this will be my first symposium going to that one. So, but yeah, they've got tours arranged of the Arsenal and the Space and Rocket Center. In fact, they're staying at the Marriott.
I went to Space Camp.
Oh, okay, they're staying at the Marriott right there at the Space Center. That's where the conference is going to be.
Nice.
Okay, are anybody's ears bleeding now? Because this, no, because the original program was like an hour and a half long. I went to linear satellites, a lot more depth, and especially if you're a newcomer to ham radio, it just too much information too soon. And I swear some people's ears were bleeding when I was done. I'm like, no, I'm cutting this way back. So, all right, everybody thoroughly confused? If you're not, then I haven't done my job.
Okay, Philip, we want to thank you for this good program. Let me get over here in camera. And I know there are probably going to be questions. Philip will be here afterwards. And Harlan will be here. He's going to take another minute in just a second. But we're basically